in the vast and unforgiving Old West, where life was as fragile as the dust that coated the roads, a wounded man on the brink of death found refuge in the most unlikely of places, a small, isolated cabin where the wind sang songs of loneliness and the silence was broken only by the gnawing of hunger. There, a widow and her 2 children, who barely had enough to eat, decided to risk everything they had, the little food, the scarce water, and their own safety, to save a stranger. Little did they know that this decision would not only save a life, but transform their own forever, weaving a story of sacrifice, redemption, and the unexpected strength that can emerge from the most improbable of bonds. The scorching Arizona desert sun barely lit the day, and the smell of dry earth, sweat, and desperation was the only company for Elias Thorne, a cowboy of few words. With a face scarred by life's hardships, he was known for his quick drawl and a heart hardened by betrayal and loss. Now, with a bullet wound in his flank, the strength that had made him a legend in the West was ebbing away. He dragged himself, his blood staining the sand, toward an oasis of hope that felt more like a feverish delusion. A lonely, tattered cabin, where a thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, a sign of life amidst the vast emptiness. With each step, the pain intensified until he collapsed at the door, his consciousness fading into a red and dark haze. Inside the cabin, life was a daily struggle against nature and poverty. Sarah, a widow with eyes tired from worry, shared the little she had with her 2 children, Ethan, 9, and Lily, 7. The relentless drought had destroyed their small corn crop, and game was scarce, making each day an uncertainty. They lived on a small garden of wilted vegetables and hope, a resource that was rapidly running out. Sarah's husband, a good and honest man, had been killed by outlaws in an ambush 6 months prior, leaving a huge void and a debt that hung over their heads. Ethan, the older child, tried to fill the absence of his father, taking on responsibilities too big for his age, helping his mother with heavy chores, and trying to protect his sister. Lily, the youngest, lived in her world of rag dolls and childhood fantasies, oblivious to the harshness of the life that surrounded them. The muffled thud of a body falling on the porch made Ethan open the door with the caution of a cornered animal. He was met with the imposing, but broken, figure of Elias. The cowboy's blue eyes, even clouded by pain and fever, still held a gleam of savage danger. The boy recoiled, startled, his heart pounding in his chest. Sarah approached, hesitant, with an old shotgun in her hands. Seeing the blood, the pain, and the exhaustion on the stranger's face, something stirred within her. Despite the fear, the scarcity, and the threat that this man represented, compassion spoke louder than reason. She knew by a primitive instinct that leaving him there would mean certain death. The family, united by fear and necessity, dragged Elias inside, laying him on a bed of straw near the cold fireplace. Sarah's decision to take in a wounded stranger was an act of madness, especially in a lawless land, but her natural kindness overcame the imminent danger. The conflict was set, and it was no longer just about survival, but about the cost of doing the right thing in a brutal world. The days that followed were a silent battle for Elias's life, fought within the lonely cabin. The high fever consumed him, making him delirious and sweat in waves that soaked the straw bed. Sarah, using the little knowledge of herbs and care passed down from her grandmother, cleaned the wound meticulously, stitching it with a thick needle and thread. Elias's agony was visible, but he remained stoic, even in the worst pain. Meanwhile, Ethan's fear and Lily's curiosity filled the air. Ethan, with a mix of fascination and apprehension, watched the wounded cowboy. Lily, with the innocence of childhood, saw him as a sleeping giant and, in her quiet games, imagined he was a prince from a fairy tale. She brought wildflowers and placed them beside his bed, believing their beauty would make him better. During the feverish delirium, Elias mumbled names and vows of revenge. Sarah, listening to the fragments of his story, sensed the aura of violence that surrounded him, but also a glimpse of something more, a story of injustice and betrayal. She felt that behind that hardened exterior was a broken man, and that made her continue. The biggest challenge for the family was food. Elias, even wounded, needed nutrients to recover, and the family's meager rations barely sufficed for themselves. Sarah, with a heavy heart, began to hunt small rabbits with her late husband's shotgun and to ration what was left of the garden even more strictly. The need to feed the stranger made the family unite even more in their purpose of survival. Elias's presence, however, also brought an unexpected motivation for Ethan. The figure of a strong man, even if weakened, awakened in him the desire to prove himself useful. The boy began spending more time trying to fix the fences and helping in the garden, feeling, for the first time since his father's death, responsible and strong. He saw in Elias not a danger, but a model of resilience. At the end of the second week of care, Elias began to show signs of improvement. The fever subsided, and he finally opened his eyes with clarity. That same night, a group of riders approached the cabin. They were 3 men with hard expressions, armed to the teeth, looking for a wounded stranger. Sarah, with a courage she didn't know she had, went out onto the porch. "I haven't seen anyone around here," she said, her voice firm. The men of Gus Miller, a cruel bandit who controlled the region, scanned the area with their eyes but left frustrated, though not convinced. Elias, even in his fragile state, perceived the danger and Sarah's sacrifice. He understood that by saving him, she was putting herself and her children in imminent risk. Gratitude, a feeling he had forgotten long ago, began to grow in his chest, slowly like a flower in the desert. Elias finally sat up, the fever subsiding and his consciousness fully returning. The first clear look he gave the world was at the humble cabin, the cracked walls, and the worried faces of Sarah and her children. He felt weak, but the determination to seek revenge on Gus Miller was a fire in his chest. He needed to leave, but an unexpected twist held him back. While he recovered, Elias began to observe the family's life. He saw Sarah's daily struggle to put food on the table, the responsibility that weighed on Ethan's shoulders, and Lily's innocence. One night, as the wind howled outside, Sarah shared the story of her husband's death. He had been ambushed by a group of outlaws, and the name of the leader was Gus Miller. The twist was an electric shock to Elias. The same man who had wounded him and stolen his gold shipment was the killer of Sarah's husband. It was more than a coincidence. It was a destiny intertwined by pain and injustice. Elias's quest for revenge merged with Sarah's, even if she didn't actively desire it. It was an unexpected connection, a bond of suffering that united them in a deep and undeniable way. That night, Elias revealed his own story to Sarah. He was a former patrolman who had been betrayed by Miller, his former partner and trusted friend. Miller stole a gold shipment they had been escorting, and in the confrontation, Elias was shot. He was seeking justice and to recover what was rightfully his. Sarah listened to the story with attention and realized that this man, despite his hardness, carried a sense of honor. She shared her own pain, the sadness of her loss, and the constant fear that had haunted her since her husband's death. The revelation was a crucial turning point. What was once a personal quest for revenge became a shared mission. Elias realized that this family, who had given him a second chance, was now his responsibility. He was no longer just a dying cowboy seeking revenge. He was the protector of a family that had given him his life back. The twist was not just the coincidence of the names, but the decision Elias made, driven by gratitude and a new sense of purpose. Elias's presence changed the cabin's dynamic in an irreversible and surprising way. He, a man of few words but great experience, began to act as a mentor for Ethan. The mornings became survival lessons in the desert. Elias taught the boy how to use an axe efficiently to chop wood, to shoot his father's rifle with precision, and most importantly, to track animals and read the signs of nature. The boy, fascinated, absorbed every lesson like a sponge, taking in not only the knowledge, but also Elias's strength and resilience. He felt, for the first time in a long time, the power to protect his family. Meanwhile, Elias repaired the house, the roof, the fences, and the cracked walls. He, a man who had lived much of his life for himself, was now building something for others. Lily, the youngest, followed him like a shadow, and he, the tough cowboy, found himself telling stories about the desert, the stars, and the animals, something he never imagined he would do. The tension was in the air, but it was a tension that came from the suspense of what was to come, not from the fear of destitution. Elias's internal conflict was evident. He felt torn between revenge, which had always guided him like a distorted moral compass, and the desire to protect this family that had become his own. With each passing day, he grew more attached to them, and the revenge, which was once a flame of hatred, transformed into a flame of justice and protection. Elias's motivation deepened. He was no longer fighting just for himself, but for Sarah and her children. He was no longer a lone wolf, but the leader of a small pack. One afternoon, Elias and Ethan were practicing with the rifle. "You have to be fast and have a sharp aim," Elias instructed, his voice low but firm. "There will always be someone wanting to take what is yours. Your life, your family, your home. You have to be ready to defend them." Ethan, with the heavy rifle in his hands, shot at a makeshift target and hit the center. Elias nodded, a rare sign of approval. That moment solidified the new relationship between them, a relationship of respect and shared purpose. News that Gus Miller and his men were approaching came from an exhausted traveler Elias had helped to recover. The time of peace, fragile and brief, had ended. Elias prepared the cabin for the confrontation, knowing that running was not an option. He explained to Sarah what would happen. Sarah's courage, fueled by the protection of her children, led her to make an unexpected decision. She would stay and fight alongside him, not with weapons, but with her intelligence and knowledge of the terrain. She reminded him of every hiding place, every shortcut, every natural danger the desert held. Ethan, with a rifle in his hands, stood by Elias's side, ready to protect his mother and sister with the determination of a man. The confrontation was inevitable and brutal. Gus Miller, a cruel man, arrived with his men, expecting to find a wounded cowboy and a defenseless family. What he found was a man with a new motivation, a courageous woman, and a boy who refused to be a victim. The battle unfolded amidst the silence of the desert. Elias, with the help of Sarah, who guided him through natural shortcuts and traps, confronted Miller. The sound of gunshots echoed through the canyon, startling the birds and breaking the desert's stillness. Ethan, in turn, with the rifle in his hands, shot to scare off the bandits' horses, disorganizing them and creating a tactical advantage for Elias. The climax was the direct confrontation between Elias and Gus Miller. The two, former partners and now mortal enemies, faced each other in a tense duel. Elias was not fighting just for gold or personal revenge. He was fighting for the lives of Sarah and the children. The duel was quick and violent. Miller was an experienced shot, but Elias had something he did not: the strength of one who fights for a family. Elias's shot struck Miller's chest, and he fell, dead, on the dry ground. The other bandits, seeing their leader fall, fled in desperation, disappearing into the dust. The victory was Elias's, but it was a victory for the family, a victory of hope over cruelty. The dust of the confrontation settled, revealing a scene of destruction, but also of relief. Elias was wounded, but alive. Sarah and the children were safe. Peace had been restored, but it was not the same peace as before. It was a peace with scars, but also with hope and a new sense of unity. The gold from the shipment, recovered from Miller's body, was there. Elias, now recovered, found himself at a crossroads. He could leave a lone wolf and continue his life as a man without roots, with the money to start a new life elsewhere. But he was no longer that man. He had found a home, a family that had accepted him without judgment. He had changed their lives, and they had changed his. The desert that was once a place of loneliness was now his home. Elias decided to stay. He used the money to rebuild the cabin, plant new seeds, and buy animals. The family, which once lived in the shadow of poverty, now lived in the light of hope. Elias was not Ethan and Lily's father, but he was the father figure they needed. He was not Sarah's husband, but he was her partner, her protector. The bond that united them was stronger than blood. It was a bond of gratitude, respect, and unconditional love. The story of Elias, the dying cowboy who was saved, is proof that kindness, even in small doses, can change destiny. It is the story of how a family that had little gave what was most valuable, hope. And in return, they received not only gold, but something much more precious, a new beginning. The moral of the story is that true wealth is not in coins, but in human connections. The story of Elias, Sarah, Ethan, and Lily became a legend whispered in the desert, a legend of how life can flourish in the most arid of places when you have the courage to love and sacrifice for another.